Today we're going to talk about retirement and how that plays out in divorce. Especially, we're going to be talking about pension plans where a person gets to enjoy the fruit of labor of a ex-spouse. This is going to be interesting, and with us, our expert today on this is going to be Brooke Mulligan.
Hello.
So, Brooke, you are taking a trip tomorrow?
I am. I'm going to a wedding in Minnesota.
Who's getting married?
It's a friend of a friend's, but he's now my friend, so my friend.
Is it a friend of your brother? Your brother lives up there, right?
Surprisingly, it's not a friend of my brother, but my mom is visiting my brother randomly this same weekend. We planned
nice.
it without knowing. So, things just work out, I guess.
I think you might be the most traveled associate in the office. Close. There's a couple of other people that are traveling a lot, but you travel a lot.
I think this is my year.
Do it.
Yeah, well,
Get out there.
Most of them are for weddings, so that's
at your age.
Yeah, it's hitting this year for me.
It's funny. I'm attending my daughter's wedding on June the 3rd, and I've never had to go to a lot of weddings. I think it was probably because I don't know my station in life, but I do know that people that are younger, in their 20s and 30s, tend to go to one after another, and you seem to be in that phase of your life.
Well, it's my boyfriend was in that phase, and then I felt like we just got out of it, and now I'm just slightly younger than him, and now it's my turn, so he is coming to everything with me. But I think I've been to 7 weddings this year, and most of them I've had to fly.
Have you had to stand up for any of them?
One of them, yes.
Just one, okay.
Yes, I got my practice in.
Yeah, very interesting. The sad thing you're going to see is just that some of these marriages won't work out.
It will not shock me, given our line of work.
Yeah, it's horrible when you see that. I mean, I love watching people walk down that aisle and commit for life, and the beauty of the bride, and just the pageantry that goes along with wedding celebrations, and just the thought that these people are really committing, and they're going to have a family together, and all the things that the two families come together, and then sometimes you get that phone call, and it's sad. It really is. But I don't want to make you sad. You go there and you have a good time. Okay?
I will.
I think in my business, I just kind of always go there and stuff. Our business.
Well, it is funny when you're meeting people at weddings, and then they obviously ask what you do, and you're like, oh. Mostly divorces.
Bring your business cards with you. Pass them around.
Yeah, people always have something to ask once you tell them that.
Speaking of tours, I know that trips. You also went to Cancun.
Cabo for another wedding.
Okay, for another wedding. Yeah, I had a client recently call me. It was a former client, so we didn't. So far, we haven't done anything. But her family has lived in Mexico, and I think it's in Cancun or Cabo, but it's one of the kind of the vacation places, right? And they want to go do a family thing and stuff. And the husband is saying no because it's too dangerous to go there. That there's a travel advisory and all this stuff. And I'm telling you, it's getting interesting how many of those are coming across for places in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like my dad. My dad hates how often I go to Mexico, but I love it, and I've never had a bad experience. But we did have that one case where our client wanted to take the daughter to Mexico, and the judge was like, yeah, what's the problem? An opposing party brought up that there's a travel advisory, and
she changed her mind.
She changed her mind
after we met and conferred. Yeah, so I don't know exactly how judges are going to rule on that. It's a touchy thing because there's so many people in Southern California that have family ties there.
Exactly.
Like she did.
Exactly.
So, saying you can't go back to see your family because there's a travel warning. I guess it's case by case and judge by judge.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're talking about something that's not dealing with travel advisories or custody or anything like that. We're talking about a good old divorce with some retirement issues. What's the name of the case?
In re Marriage of Belthius.
I'm glad you could pronounce it.
I think that's what we're going to call it. I meant to look it up and see if there was a pronunciation, but I think it's Belthius.
Okay, so why don't you give us the facts? It's not going to be a very lengthy decision, but I think there could be some interesting conversation. So tell me about it.
All right. So we have wife Angela and husband Daryl. They were married from September 14th, 1985 to September 1st, 1995. This actually brings up my first question for you. It was something I hadn't really thought of. As you know, long-term marriages are determined to be marriages that last 10 years or longer. So this
Well, let me say it's presumed to be.
presumed to be.
Because I've read, but I've actually seen it in court where courts will determine that a long-term marriage really isn't long because the parties didn't live together after the first year. And then I've seen other cases where people have been together for 30 years and then they, on the 25th year, they get married and there's
Oh.
domestic violence. I had one judge say, yeah, Mr. Schweitzer, this is a long-term marriage. And I'm
Interesting.
like, but. Yeah. So there's discretion.
Okay.
But as a rule, and a very strong rule, 10 years is presumed to be, yeah.
Okay, so in this case, they just barely miss a full 10 years by 14 days. Is that enough for a court to determine it wouldn't be long-term?
I think it depends on the judge, and of course it depends on the facts, And so, like what I said is, how long were these people together before that? Did they have children? Was there a case where there was maybe some domestic violence and the person couldn't get out of it? I mean, there's a lot, it's a court of equity. In the case that I told you about where it was a 5-year or less marriage, and this was a long time ago that I did this. I'm not naming names, but my client was accused of committing some pretty atrocious violence on the woman that I didn't know about until we were in the hearing.
Oh, great. Our
favorite. And I learned that they were together since she was a child. And these people are now, in their 50s and 60s or whatever it was, and it was a horrendous type of relationship where she claimed that he had been a pimp, put her out on the street, and stuff, and abused her and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I don't want to be here. But that's when the judge said, I'm not going to cut the spousal support off here,
very
and stuff, and
interesting.
made it ongoing. Now, that doesn't mean it's not modifiable, but, we know that the court has discretion, and I would use that as kind of one example of when it might be,
Yeah, and it being a court of equity, I feel like the 14 days, the court's more likely to look at it as a long-term marriage. If it was, they were living together, all that.
Yeah, and are they both working? Are they capable of supporting themselves? If it's one where one completely sacrificed herself, and the other guy just made a huge success of himself during that 9 years and
11 months and 15 days.
Yeah, so who knows?
All right, well, thought it was just a little interesting, but getting back to the case, Daryl joined the LAPD in October 1987, so that's after marriage.
Could we insert some LAPD music, please, like Dragnet or something at this point?
The story you are about to see is true.
During the marriage, he was promoted as follows. He was Police Officer 1, Police Officer 2, and Police Officer 3. I don't know the ins and outs of those different rankings, but obviously the higher you go, you're getting an increase.
They're increasing pays, right?
And he was a Police Officer 3 at the time of separation. They do a stipulated judgment, and as part of it, the relevant part awarded them each 1/2 of the community interest in Daryl's LAPD pension, and it was to be divided per the time rule formula, and they cited in remarriage of Judd and in remarriage of Henkel. So
And what year was that?
that was in around 1987.
Long time ago.
A long time ago, yes.
Right. So they that formula that they use, I don't know if it's the same one, but I think that they're also sometimes, since I've been practicing family law, they refer to it as the Brown formula.
They did not refer to it as that in here,
Yeah,
but maybe
I know. Yeah.
they've changed it. But everything goes along fine. I guess they all get on with their lives. Daryl is promoted after the date of separation to Detective 1, Detective 2, Sergeant 1, Sergeant 2.
He's a golden boy.
Yeah, he ends up at Lieutenant 2, which seems pretty high.
Very successful career
Yes.
at LAPD. And much of his success comes after he divorces.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And so he retires in August 2019, and now we have the pension issue to deal with. Angela files a request for...
Did you say 2019?
Yes.
So they get divorced in the late 80s, but here it is 2019, and I don't even know if you've seen his ex-wife for 2 decades.
Yeah.
And so she comes in and she says,
It's time.
It's time. Okay. So what happens?
So she files a request that her quadro be entered. They don't get into this, but I would imagine there was some, meet and conferring before she filed. And obviously they have a different understanding of how this quadro should be written.
Okay. So what's a quadro?
A quadro is a qualified domestic relations order. It's how, it's the process in which lawyers divide pension
Yeah.
plans.
So one thing I do want to clarify is that courts have to have jurisdiction over retirement plans, right? You just can't say that things are going to be divided because the retirement plan hasn't been contacted or ordered to do anything. So they get these specified orders that are usually prepared by experts. When they're private plans, they're called quadros, qualified domestic relations orders. Conversely, if they're government plans, they're called domestic relations orders. And the distinction is, just for the sake of education, not necessarily for this case, is important, because what happens in a government plan is those plans have to be joined into the divorce, and then the court makes the orders. So at some point, there was a joinder of the LAPD pension into this thing, and the court is now being faced with competing DROs, domestic relations orders. Husband wants one thing, wife wants the other, and the judge is saying, okay, well, tell me why.
Well, so interestingly enough, and I wanted to ask you about this, they never call it a DRO. They always are calling it a quadro in here, but it would be a government plan.
Yeah.
So I was a little confused with the language.
Yeah. So let me also, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think I am. A qualified domestic relations order comes out of ERISA, because private plans are actually governed by the federal statutes. And the statute says you shall have a qualified domestic relations order prepared and signed by the judge, served on the plan, right? So things like 401ks, private pension plans, things like that, DROs here in California, they've got their own thing. They don't need it. And typically, they'll tell you how it should be. They'll write their own.
They'll tell you what to do.
We know how to do this, and stuff, so.
So anyway, the big points of contention between the quadros are how exactly to divide it and who would be the beneficiary in case of Angela's death. They specifically talk about Angela's death, but I would imagine it had to go both ways, so in the event of either party's death. Angela wants to determine, actually, I think this is a good time to actually say what the time rule is.
You understand it? Good. I want to educate me.
Well, this is what they say. I understand it more as a math problem than
See, that's
the
why
language.
that's why I asked you to help me with this one.
So under the time rule, the community is allocated a fraction of the pension benefits. The numerator, so on top, the numerator representing the length of service during marriage but before separation, and the denominator, the bottom number, representing the total length of service by the employee's spouse. That ratio is then multiplied by the final plan benefit to determine the community interest. So essentially, in this case, he worked from 87 until 95, so that's 7 years, or 8 years, and then
During the marriage.
During the marriage, and then he worked completely, from 87 to 2019, and we need to pause if we want me to calculate that number.
I mean, it's
'cause
like
forget.
22 years more.
Yeah.
This guy was a lifer, man.
Yeah,
he
he
was
was in-
working for 30, 40 years, whatever it was. I mean, he was there for a long time.
I think it's 33 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so the bulk of his time at LAPD was spent not married to her.
Exactly.
Right. So it's the very beginning, but then he goes on and he has a very successful career. I mean, to make it to lieutenant in any police department is impressive, and the pay increase is usually substantial.
I would imagine so.
Okay.
So essentially, where the difference is what is that ratio is going to be multiplied by. Everyone is in agreement that it's going to be the time rule. Everyone agrees with the length of time that he worked during the marriage and the length of time he worked in general. But where Angela, wife, wants to multiply it by the end benefit, he wants to multiply it by where he was when they separated. So
He
Officer
creates like
3.
a hypothetical. I want you to assume that I never got promoted.
Exactly.
Now, why is that important?
He makes a lot more now, and he is arguing that basically everything he's done since the date of separation, all those promotions are all his hard work. He took it upon himself to go to school more. He, worked really hard, so she shouldn't benefit from any of that.
From his increases in pay based
Exactly.
upon his post-divorce efforts.
Yes.
Right?
And I will give the guy some credit. He does agree that she would be entitled to interest based on, however much she got. And so they do. He does say that to take that into account. They also don't explain it super well, but kind of reading between the lines, it looks like if you retire at a higher rank, you also get some extra bonuses to your pension. They don't list exactly what that is, but I think it's more than just he was making more money at that time. It's an actual
Maybe it's a larger percentage or something like that.
something like
Yeah.
that. So they don't
Okay.
exactly say it, but I can tell you, based on their differences in how to apply the time rule, if they were to take his calculation, her monthly share of the pension would be just over $1,000 a month, and her share of the drop account would be just almost $52,000.
So a drop account is probably what you were talking about.
I
Maybe?
think
Yeah.
so.
So that's kind of like money set aside that they get to. Okay, go ahead.
But if they use Angela's proposal, her monthly share would be a little, or just over $13,000. I'm sorry, $1,300 a month, and then her share of the drop account would be just over $70,000. So it's significant.
What's the difference in the two pension payouts?
It's only like $360 difference.
Well, I thought it was more than that. So if she gets it her way, then there's about $300 more. So they're fighting over $300 more per month.
Per month, but then also, almost $20,000 more from that drop account. So
Okay.
the $20,000
Okay,
is what
I'm glad you're clarifying that because I don't think I paid attention to how much it was.
it was. A
Okay.
footnote, so
Okay.
easy to
Okay,
miss.
good.
So yes, there is something to be fighting over. And then the other big thing they're fighting over is who would be the beneficiary in the case of Angela's death. Like I said, obviously Angela wants it that, her separate property interest would pass to her beneficiary designation on file with the board. If there was no one on the board, it would be per her will. And if she has no will, just following normal probate law.
Yeah.
And then Daryl says that no, it should just revert to me, which is, I read that and it's like, I must have misread that. That's a little laughable of a position to take, in my opinion. And surprised the court agrees with me. So that second point, I think, is easier to talk about before we get into the time rule. So essentially,
We're talking about beneficiary interest in pension plans.
yes.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I should say first that the court finds in favor of Daryl and enters his quadro, and Angela appeals, which is why we have this great decision.
So the court says, I agree with the husband's calculation as to what the payout should be to mom.
Yes.
Okay. And I agree with husband with respect to beneficiary interest. In other words, if she predeceases him, it all reverts back to him again.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so let's talk about that point about the beneficiary interest. The court, it's pretty short there now, the Court of Appeals analysis of that. But basically, if you allow that to happen, you are kind of undermining the whole idea of separate property. They came to the agreement to split the community interest, and then it's going to be assigned to each person as their separate property. But if you take away the right to inherit someone's, to pass that along to your children or whoever you want, you're basically, it's not really separate property at that point.
Let me jump in on this a little bit. I was a little bit surprised to see that was a published portion of this decision, because I think it was about maybe 10, 15 years ago. There was an appellate court decision that dealt with the same issue where there is a beneficiary interest. It wasn't mentioned, right? Husband was given, his pension. I think he bought her out, right? And so, if I have this right, but it was determined a long time ago that's a property right, right? So unless you specifically say that she's giving up her beneficiary interest in the dissolution, the judgment, then it's hers,
Right.
So.
Well, and going along with that, they do get into a discussion of kind of the history first they ruled that essentially what that quadro was doing is it violates Family Code Section 2610, which provides that the court shall make whatever orders are necessary or appropriate to ensure that each party receives the party's full community property share in any retirement plan, whether public or private, including all survivor and death benefits. And that section was actually enacted to abolish the terminable interest rule, which came from another court decision. So this is it's very clear the intention of this section, and then this quadra would
Once upon
directly.
a time, husband would have been right, but the law was changed a long time ago.
Yes. This was in 2005. That's when the that's when the decision was. But yes, anyway, it's been a long time.
It sure has. I said it was 10 or 15 years ago. It was more like 20 years ago. Okay.
So that's how the court finds on the issue of the beneficiary interest. Going back to the time rule, they get into a discussion about in remarriage of Judd, which says that the relation between years of community service to total years of service provides a fair gauge of that portion of retirement benefits attributable to community effort.
So let me stop you there. What I found interesting in this decision, it looks like you've read it better than I have, but there was competing policy arguments as to why the court should have ruled, right? On one hand, what was and the appellate court weighed through those two arguments. I found merit in both of them, quite frankly, but I think that the appellate court got it right. So why don't you explain the policies?
Sure. So essentially, what the policy that Daryl, husband, was arguing was, I kind of got into it before, but basically, after we separated, I did all of this work to, increase my station in life, to get these promotions. All of that came from my separate hard work.
Okay, let's not go too fast on this because I think there's a lot of people that would agree with him, okay, especially cops, all right? So he's the one that went out on the night shift and presumably put his life at risk. He's the one that had to undergo the strict procedures of being a cop, right? Subjecting himself to the public. He's the one that had to maybe discipline people, work weird hours, go to school. His effort, how is that different than if somebody took a business and made it something after the divorce, right? Or something like that. I think, that thought about your effort should not be shared after the divorce. Let's say it's a spousal support argument. Husband is a government worker during the marriage. He earns $60,000 a year. They divorce. He's got to pay some spousal support, $300 per month. Okay? But what happens is that he goes to school and he becomes a doctor. And he's earning $500,000 a year. Wife says, hey, I want spousal support to be increased because, look, now you could pay me more. Well, we know that. What's the argument there?
Well, it's based on the marital standard of living.
Yeah, and your efforts, our post-separation efforts shouldn't be shared. So that's a common argument we hear. So long as we know what the marital standard of living is, she shouldn't share in that.
Right.
So this cop is going,
that's what happened here.
yeah, he's saying, hey, look, you know what? I put in 20 more years here. Come on.
So what the court, the other
Okay, let's
side,
see what the other argument is.
and I think it comes down to how the court determines what retirement even is. And so there's this good line, I thought, that the right to retirement benefits is a right to draw from a stream of income that begins to flow and is defined on retirement. So they are defining retirement benefits as something that you don't get until the end. And so for her to get her portion of it, you have to look at what the retirement account is at the end.
And I think as far as policy, what the Court of Appeals said was, look, let's look at this through the wife's eyes now. Okay, we've heard you, but this thing that you've done by being a LAPD cop, that was added to during the marriage. Mm-hmm. She contributed to that. She was that woman that was staying at home, worried about you. She's the one that, had to deal with your war stories when you came home and talked about, all the things that happened. All this stuff that happened during that marriage was just the beginning of a growth of an asset, right? So the Court of Appeal looked at it as, she could share in the growth, even though it's your efforts afterwards. Mm-hmm. It was part of something that you co-owned.
Right.
Right.
And, they say that the promotion, his big argument was, I did all these promotions through my separate work. The court said no, rather the promotion stemmed from an indivisible mixture of effort and progress both during and after the marriage.
It started at the beginning.
It started.
Here.
Couldn't, if you couldn't jump to where you were after the data separation without all the hard work you had put in before. And she was a part of that.
Okay. Do you agree with this?
I think so. It is.
I do too.
I think it's the right call. It's a difficult call.
Yeah.
But I do agree with it, and I think it's interesting. They discussed a little bit about the wife that was there in the beginning when you weren't making so much. She is, I should say, he or she is. Provide they have a longer time for that little bit of money to increase in value, whereas the wife who maybe comes in at the end, and so she's only going to get a smaller portion of the retirement account, percentage wise, but it's going to be a larger amount at that end. It's interesting how they were weighing those different proportions, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I do think it's the right call. You can't. I think what really did it for her husband is, one, I don't think it was good that he included that beneficiary interest. I think it put maybe them on their heels a little bit, and then also, he wanted basically them to order a QDRO based on a hypothetical. They couldn't give you the actual number that they should be multiplying the ratio we've discussed about before. They had to come up with, like you said, a hypothetical.
Right.
And I don't think the court wants to set a precedent that you can just, because think of all the fighting that's going to come about that too. And how do you weigh, how do you get that information, especially when, in this case it's 2019, or I guess it was 2023 when this was finally decided. Looking back at something that happened in 1995?
Yeah, that's asking a lot. The court shall hypothetically assume, So, they made it consistent with what we know about retirement plans. And when people get to, if you're the out spouse, you're the spouse that didn't do the work or you didn't have the job, but you're entitled to some of the retirement. The question is are you going to start drawing as of the date of the retirement, when you can when he could retire? Let's say that he's at the 20-year mark and he could start drawing a pension. She's got to make a decision as to whether she wants to get paid out there, because she can,
right,
even though he's going to work for another 10 20 years, or does she want to hold off? So not holding off by getting paid right away is called a Gilmore election. And what they do in California is they make I'm going to call them cops, because I don't know if anybody else that has something similar to this. There probably are other government
probably
employees.
Firefighters. It is the police and firefighters pension fund.
So what would happen is that it would come out of his paycheck as to what the monthly payout would be. So they would just probably an earning assignment or something to go to her. But she doesn't get any increase at that point. So then he's free to become the chief of police and earn $700,000 a year, and she doesn't get any of that. Or she could be smart. She could say, you know what? He drinks a lot. He used to smoke. He hasn't been watching his diet. He's going to die before me, and stuff. And I'm going to live forever. I've been perfect. So I'm going to take my chances, And that's what this woman did. She took her chance, because we're talking about all those years, right? And she got benefit from that. It was a smart investment on her part.
Yeah, I think it depends on how risk adverse you are. I feel like I would start taking it as soon as I could. Just, what is it? 1 in the hand is better than 2 in the bush.
God, I love that. Yes. I don't know. You would. Okay, that's interesting. But it was guaranteed for her, though. So it just depends on. And we do get clients a lot of times to say, I really need that money now. Because I'm not working, and I could be collecting, close to $2,000 a month. That would go a long way.
Well, and they don't give the ages of the parties, but
what year are we talking? 1987?
I mean, they must be older, but I don't know if she's at retirement age.
Yeah, they're at retirement age, yeah.
So, yeah,
definitely.
I mean, in that case, why not just start enjoying the money, the fun?
Well, here's my answer is, how much can you do with, well, in this scheme of things, you're right, because there was only a $300 difference in here. So you're right. In other cases, it might be different. Let's say that it was the wife that was there for 20 years. Now we're talking about a bigger portion of the retirement. And there it would maybe make a difference to start, to wait or whatever and stuff. I don't know. But they say that Gilmore elections are difficult to manage. I've never done one, and, I don't know. I think that the thing that needs to be discussed, too, is that beneficiary interest a lot of times depends on what election the person makes at the beginning of his or her career. So sometimes what those elections are is like I will take less upon retirement for a larger beneficiary interest.
Interesting.
They get to do that and stuff. They can't change it later on and stuff, during the divorce. So there's a lot to consider. So my advice, is that determine, what you want to do on a divorce. Are you going to start drawing like as soon as you can, or are you going to hold out? And by the way, people are free to divide unequally. I had, because cops love their pensions, right? As a former cop, I could tell you I walked away from the promise of a nice pension, but all my friends are enjoying their retirement now. They work very, very hard for it, and it hurts like heck to have to divide it, even if it's the right thing to do. So I had one case where I was representing a wife of an LAPD detective sitting in this room, and the guy broke down in tears. He'd been a cop for 25 years, and we valued his pension, and the actuary said that his pension was worth about $1 million. And he wanted to buy her out, but he couldn't really, and he cried, and my client agreed to take less.
That's
So
nice of her.
people don't have to necessarily divide it equally if they want, and there's other things. You could buy somebody out. The old expression, she keeps the house, he keeps the retirement pension. That does happen a lot in divorces that we've seen, right? So cool. Well, thank you very much. You were
course.
really, really on this one, man.
It was
I'm glad you
interesting.
were. Yeah, I was afraid that you'd say, Don, you gave me this crazy formula one. I don't know how to deal with this. That you really stepped up for it. So,
Well, anytime.
thank you. Okay, and thank you for joining us on Exhibit A.